All right, let's get started. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth. I am the Outreach and Development Associate with Chatham Conservation. I want to welcome you all to our winter webinars made possible by the Chatham Cultural Council. Quick preview at what we have left. There's not much. Today, you are here for the global importance of seagrass conservation. And next weekend, we conclude our series with Digging Up Chatham's Past, which is a focus on the Nickerson property. If you're not already, make sure you follow us on socials and sign up for our emails. Also, if you could comment in the chat how you discovered our webinar, that would be great. We're trying to figure out how we can share it more. And save the date. We've got Earth Week coming up in April. There'll be walks, talks, sapling giveaways, and our fourth annual town cleanup, as well as our town forum at the community center. We're going to be focusing on why dark skies matter, and we will have James Lowenthal from the Dark Skies Initiative be presenting, which is very exciting. Anywho, on to today. Today we have Agnes Mittermayr from the Center of Coastal Studies, and she is going to be speaking to you all about global seagrass conservation. So I am going to pass it on over to Agnes whenever she's ready.
Good morning, everybody. Just a bit of a disclaimer. I have 4 baby chickens in the room with me. They might be rambunctious, so that's what you hear in the background. All right, let me share my screen with you. Let me go into presentation mode. How does that look? All right. All right. And let me move all of you away so I can see my screen. There we go. Welcome. Thanks for getting up early. I hope you're enjoying your coffee. I'm going to tell you about the global importance of seagrasses in general. So we'll do a little primer. Seagrasses 101, what are they? Where do they grow? Talk about seagrasses and the environment, the threats to seagrasses, how we can properly manage seagrasses. I'll tell you about SeagrassNet, and I'll also give you some case studies. So what are seagrasses? Seagrasses can be called a foundation species, which means that they provide structure on the ocean floor for other species to inhabit, which is really important for small species. A lot of small species start out in the seagrass. Seagrasses are the only marine angiosperm, so they're the only marine plant with flowers. I recently saw a very interesting graph and concept. I couldn't get a hold of it, so I can't show you, but I can tell you about it. So seagrasses, algae came onto land just like the dinosaurs way back when came onto land. The whales came onto land to turn into wolves and canines. So the algae came onto land to turn into angiosperms, and then they went back into water, just like the canines did, which is now why we have whales and why we have flowering marine plants. The seagrasses form meadows, just like land grasses. Those meadows can be either one species or many species of seagrasses. Around here, we mostly have one species called eelgrass. And seagrasses, because they have flowers, they also need pollinators, just like land plants. So for underwater pollinators, we have the currents, we have the water itself, but we also have animals like little worms, crabs, amphipods, little shrimp. So it's very similar to what we have on land. And here is one of those pollinators, a little worm that I found in a seagrass meadow in the US Virgin Islands. It was doing its job. So where do those seagrasses grow? They basically grow in all coastal waters except for Antarctica, and that is probably due to ice scour. We don't really know for sure. At first, people thought it was because light limitation. It gets dark for a very long time in both Antarctica and Arctica. But we're also observing seagrasses moving north and south, so the light might not be the issue. There's a lot of research going into that right now. There's around 5 families of seagrasses and about 70 species. We're still not sure. There's a lot of genetic work being done into figuring out what's a standalone species and what might be too closely related to call a separate species. So seagrasses get split up into 6 bioregions, which you can see here on the map. The first bioregion I'm going to tell you about is our bioregion, the temperate North Atlantic. In bioregion number 1, there's very low species diversity. We have one main species, Zostera marina, or eelgrass, which is what we have on the Cape. And a lot of our seagrass here was decimated about 100 years ago by the wasting disease, which is a fungus that affects the ability of the grass to photosynthesize. The fungus came over from Europe in the 1920s and 30s, probably with ship traffic. We still find the disease in our meadows today, and when you're out and about and when you look at seagrass, sometimes you can see brown, dark brown, almost black splotches on the blades themselves, and that's one sign of wasting disease. Those splotches, they start out in the center of the leaf and then spread out to the edges. That's one way to differentiate it from just regular senescence of leaves, dying off of leaves. So here we have eelgrass, and this is eelgrass in Pleasant Bay. This is what it looks like, a nice, healthy meadow. In the tropical Atlantic, we have up to 10 different species. I was lucky enough to visit the US Virgin Islands last year to do some research on seagrasses, and I found this invasive species. Well, it's well established. I didn't find it. I just saw it. It's called Halophila, and it looks so pretty. You would never know that it's not supposed to be there. In the tropical Atlantic, seagrasses also deal with a lot of herbivores like turtles, manatees, dugongs, things like that, which we don't really have in the temperate North Atlantic. So that's a whole different ecosystem and food web based on that. And this is a picture of that invasive species in the US Virgin Islands. In the Mediterranean, we have one endemic species. Endemic means that it is only present in one certain location. So there's not a whole lot of diversity in the Mediterranean. The species is called Posidonia oceanica. And fun fact, it's one of the oldest living organisms that we have on Earth because it clones itself. You know how some plants can propagate themselves, so the genetic material really is the exact same as the mother plant. So what we have in the Mediterranean, and this is a picture of what it looks like, that grass, that has existed for millions of years. I was very excited when I got to visit it a couple of years ago. Now, in the temperate North Pacific, we have more diversity than in the Atlantic still. We have about 15 species, and most of them are Zostera, which is what we have here, or closely related, another subspecies. And in the temperate North Pacific, this is a picture I took in Alaska last year. I was lucky enough to visit the Eisenbach National Wildlife Refuge. And I'm pretty sure I have to do some more digging, but I'm pretty sure that that seagrass meadow up there is the largest seagrass meadow in the world. It was phenomenal. And here's a picture of me in that seagrass meadow. So this is the exact same species that we have here on the Cape. But our eelgrass, it gets about 2 feet long, 3 feet on a good day. And the grass that I saw in Alaska, it was 12 feet long. The longest blade of grass we found was 306 centimeters. That's incredible. It was it was fascinating. I hope to go back one day. And then in the tropical Indo-Pacific, we have the absolute hotspot of species diversity in terms of seagrasses. 24 species have been found in that region, and they often coincide with mangroves and coral reefs. So the general biodiversity in along those meadows is through the roof. I've never been there. I hope to go. Fingers crossed, maybe next year, and I'll bring back lots of pictures. And this is one of those meadows in the North Pacific. And then we have the temperate Southern Ocean, our last bioregion for our seagrasses. There's about 18 species in the Southern Ocean, and there's 4 endemic species. So there's 4 species that only exist in that region and nowhere else. And then we have, this is a tiny little seahorse in Australia. And I want to, can you see my cursor? I don't know if you can. On the southern end of Australia, southwestern coast of Australia, researchers recently discovered not the oldest, but the largest living organism in the world, which is also a seagrass meadow. And because it clones itself, it's basically one individual. So they're fighting the mycologists right now because earlier mycologists claimed that the largest living organism is a type of mushroom. But yeah, those are the fun little fights we have in science. So seagrasses and the environment. Excuse me. Um, Obviously, seagrasses as a photosynthesizing plant are incredibly important for primary production. Um, and they are the basis of many, many food webs, whether they are being grazed on directly by dugongs or turtles or urchins or even seabirds, um, or they're hosting a whole bunch of smaller individuals that are in turn prey for larger species. So usually you get high biodiversity in seagrass meadows, higher than non-vegetated areas around it. 1 acre of seagrass can support up to 40,000 fish and 50 million small invertebrates. Now that's a global estimate, not for the Cape, but it's incredible. Can you imagine 40,000 fish? Seagrasses reduce current flow if you are in Wellfleet and you choose to go to Duck Harbor on the bay. You can see that there's this is where this picture was taken. At low tide, you can see a very, very patchy meadow. And that patchy meadow has become even patchier in recent years. And then you might have heard of that big overwash in Duck Harbor that just went over the dune, flattened the dune, and now there's regular flooding in the area behind it. And I'm working with geologists at the Center for Coastal Studies, and we're trying to figure out what came first. Was the overwash, all the water that moved into the area, was that the cause for the seagrass to disappear and become patchier, or was the seagrass disappearing and then the overwash could happen because nothing reduced that flow of water? So that's an ongoing thing. I'll let you know when we find out. But generally speaking, seagrass meadows do prevent coastal erosion, and they do stabilize the sediment. They also trap a lot of nutrients and carbon, especially. Seagrasses are twice as good as capturing carbon sequestration, than tropical rainforests, the poster child for carbon sequestration. And the pool that is currently calculated to be stored in seagrass meadows, or rather underneath seagrass meadows, is almost 20 billion tons. So they are able to store 1 acre of seagrass meadow is able to store about the same amount as is being emitted by a car traveling 380 miles, 3,080 miles, sorry. So they're really, really quite efficient at storing carbon and sequestering carbon. And that's something that has only recently come to light within the last 5 to 8 years. So people are really looking into that, and they have calculated and estimated that seagrasses might only cover 0.2% of the ocean floor. Opinions differ on that, but it's a very, very small area. But they're still more efficient in capturing carbon than terrestrial forests, which cover 31% of the land area. So they're a good ally in our fight against climate change. So other things that seagrasses do for the environment, obviously they provide habitat and nursery habitat for small fish and shellfish. They attenuate the waves. They prevent resuspension, which means that if you have a seagrass meadow, your water will most likely be clearer than if you don't have a seagrass meadow. They buffer ocean acidification. They remove bacteria. They can be used for food and medicine. And recreation, obviously, it's phenomenal. If you get a chance to snorkel through a seagrass bed, please do it. So how does the environment shape the seagrass bed formation? Certain things need to be met for seagrass to be able to grow. So the area should have a moderate flow regime. If the currents are too high, the plants can't settle down, the seeds can't settle down. And if it's too low, excuse me. And if it's too low, you might not have enough, you might have stagnant water and not enough oxygen and for them to grow. They need light. Obviously, they're a photosynthesizing plant. So most seagrasses, especially around here, have a pretty shallow distribution. I think the deepest edge of the bed I have seen around the Cape was about 12 feet. But when you go to the Caribbean, you can go down to 80 feet and still find seagrasses. So it's really a question of how clear the water is. They appreciate symbionts like nitrogen fixing bacteria that are in the sediment, which help them increase their nutrient supply and their nutrient take-up. There's what we call facilitators, which are certain types of nutrients that have to be present in the sediment for the seeds to germinate. And then succession, you might have heard of succession patterns in terrestrial forests, for example. The same is true for the seafloor. So the sediment has to be kind of ready. It needs those nutrients, it needs those bacteria for the seagrass to successfully establish a meadow. So threats, there's many, many threats to seagrasses. Obviously, we're talking about eutrophication. If you're living on the Cape, you know very well what happens when there's too much fertilizer, too much nitrogen in the water. We get algae blooms, which in turn block the light. And if the grass can't photosynthesis because there's no light, there will be reduced growth of seagrasses. We have the harvesting of suspension feeders. And by that, I don't mean you walking out at low tide and picking up some scallops. I mean industrial sized harvesting and taking out the suspension feeders like scallops, but also other things that suffer from this practice, like snails or small shrimp or amphipods, means that we get more growth of epiphytes on the seagrass blades, like the biofilm. Um, and those suspension feeders keep that biofilm under control. Um, so if there's no suspension feeders to control those epiphyte levels, the they overgrow the leaves. Not enough sunlight can reach the leaves, and then they can photosynthesize. The plants can photosynthesize, and they can grow as efficiently. Then we have dredging and boat damage. Luckily, a lot of outreach has been very successful, especially in this area. Just creating more awareness. You shouldn't anchor in the seagrass bed. Don't pull it up. Be mindful of where your prop is when you're in shallow water, things like that. And with so what can happen with dredging and boat damage is you can see all those lines through the meadow in this picture, and it causes fragmentation. So the seagrass that grows on the edge of the meadow is more stressed than the seagrass that grows inside of the meadow. And by increasing that fragmentation, we're basically increasing the edge of the seagrass meadow. And it's like one of those baking trays for brownies where you only have edge pieces. Um, I prefer edge pieces, but the eelgrass does not. So because the plants on the edge are more stressed, they're less efficient in growing and photosynthesizing. Then we have the disease that I mentioned earlier, the wasting disease that came over in the 30s. And here you can kind of see the brown patches on the leaves that I mentioned earlier. So same thing, brown patches can photosynthesize and the plant becomes less efficient in growing and more stressed overall. And then obviously, after big storms, um, I'm sure you've seen eelgrass washed up on the beaches, which is totally fine if it happens once or twice or three times a year. But with the increasing frequency and intensity of storms, this is happening more often now. And then one of the most severe threats to seagrasses is the rising water temperatures that we're experiencing. So already in the tropics, we're seeing high die-offs of seagrasses there because they just can't deal with the hot water. So what happens is the plants migrate towards the poles where the water's cooler. And then I know I mentioned earlier we're not sure about the light limitation, if that's the reason that we don't see seagrasses in the Arctic and Antarctica, which is true for northern and southern species, but species from the Caribbean, for example, they're used to plenty of sunshine all year round. So when they move into areas with light limitation, less light, the plants can get stressed and less able to grow. And I wanted to show you a picture that I took, that my colleague took a couple of years ago in East Harbor, which is the body of water next to Route 6 as you drive into Provincetown. And we had a bleaching event, at least that's what we're calling it, because we don't really know. We haven't seen this before, but the water in East Harbor got like bathtub warm. And by bathtub warm, I mean like upper 80s. So it was incredibly warm in there. And it looks like almost like coral bleaching because only the tips of the leaves turned white. The bottom, the lower parts of the plants, they were still green. Um, we haven't seen this since. We assume it's because of temperature, because all other variables were pretty much the same as previous years. So now on hot days, we always go out in East Harbor and check the status of the seagrass there. But the bleaching means that there's no photosynthesis going on in those plants, at least in those parts of the plants. So more stress for the plant. And what I also should mention is seagrasses, all seagrass species generally, are, are very able to deal with one of those threats, like one stressor, and it's fine. But if you add another one on top of that and another one on top of that, eventually the plant can't keep up. I like to use the example of me waking up with a headache and being like, oh, it's fine. I'll just take some aspirin and I'll be fine. But then something else happens and something else happens and another one and another stressor. And then eventually I just can't go to work anymore and stay home. So it's the same with the seagrasses. They're very much able to deal with one stressor, but if you add on top of that, it becomes more difficult for the plant to survive. So seagrasses in Massachusetts have been declining for a long time. Since the early 1990s, we have lost almost half of our seagrass meadows in Massachusetts. So if you go, wait, I have to move your pictures again so I can see all of the cape. Just a second. There we go. If you just focus on any point in that map, as I'll click through, and this was from 95. This is from 2001, 2010, 15, 19. So this is the side by side. If you go online, Mass DEP has this app called the Eelgrass Viewer, where you can look at that map for basically any point in Massachusetts and see how the seagrass is doing there. The way they're doing that is they fly over those areas, take a lot of pictures, and then delineate the seagrass meadows on their computers. What happened, I should say, you can see that whole big meadow off of Billingsgate that basically disappeared now. This is true. There is hardly any grass left at Billingsgate, but you have to be careful because back in 1995, the ground truthing wasn't as good as one would hope. So ground truthing means that if you're on the plane and you take those pictures and you make that map, you need to double check and send somebody to actually stick their head in the water and see if this is seagrass or not. Because especially from the air, a lot of other plants might look like seagrass. So DEP started ground truthing a few years after, in like the early 2000s. And that's why that big shift happened early on, because they actually ground truthed and saw that, oh, this is not eelgrass at all. This is some codium bed or something. So we didn't necessarily lose that patch of grass. It was never there to begin with. But still, overall, Massachusetts has lost about 50% of seagrass meadows in the last 30 years. So, which takes me to the next threat is the lack of information. This study came out, the map for this study came out in 2009, a long time ago. And back then, we still don't really know now, but nobody knows how much seagrass meadows, what's the area? Like the estimates go from excuse me, 170,000 to 600,000 square kilometers. That's a big difference. Nobody knows how much we have actually lost because 100 years ago, people didn't necessarily care as much about seagrass meadows. So did we lose 20%? Did we lose 30%? Did we lose 50% like we did in Massachusetts? Nobody knows. How many species are there? I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of genetic work happening right now to figure out if what may look similar might be two different species, or what may look very different might be the same species, just different phenotypes. We do know that of the 22 species that we know of, that those are declining. Some other species are doing very well, but we know that 22 are declining. And when you look at that map, you can see that there's, oh, I can show you. I don't know if you see my cursor, but there's basically no information for South America, very little information for Africa, very little information for Southeast Asia. So while our seagrass meadows here in North America and in Europe and in Australia are very well studied, they're not necessarily the locations where you would expect those high biodiversity hotspots like Southeast Asia for with the map I showed you at the beginning. So luckily, a lot of research in the last 5 to 8 years has happened, and people are becoming more aware that we really don't know a whole lot of about seagrasses. So a lot has been happening in that area. Excuse me. Oh, this is the area in question. Blank spots on the map. So in 2024, the United Nations decided that they're going to launch what they call the Seagrass Breakthrough. And they started the World Seagrass Day, which was March 1st. So a breakthrough, the UN did that for coral reefs in the early 2010s. And then they did it for mangroves a little bit later. And now they're doing it for seagrass. And I'm part of that effort. And at first I was like, there's a lot of talking, but not a lot of things actually happening. And I'm more a doer than a talker. So I was kind of disillusioned with the whole thing. But as we kept talking and as I became more aware of the global issues around seagrass conservation and seagrass restoration, I realized that we actually do need a lot of talking before we can start doing, because what do I know of seagrass meadows in the Philippines and how people are using them and how people are trying to restore them. So it's grown on me. It's grown on me since. And they're also, I mean, it's the UN, they're good in raising awareness. They put out a lot of information for people, not just scientists, but also managers. So they they basically decided on 4 goals for the seagrass breakthrough, which is we need to halt the loss of seagrasses. And you wouldn't believe the hours of conversations we had when deciding how much percentage do we want to stop from being lost. Like, should we want to stop 50% of all eelgrass loss? Should we stop 75%? There were so many discussions. And then should we call it halting seagrass loss or should we call it stopping seagrass loss? Which is where I got disillusioned because I just want to let the seagrass grow and not discuss whether it should be halting or stopping seagrass loss. There were many conversations about how much area we want to protect. Should it be 50%, which is what we settled on? Should it be 30%? Is it more attainable to say 30%, and or is it too scary to say 50 or 75%? So we settled on doubling the area under protection and then accelerating seagrass restoration and promoting long-term finance, which goes hand in hand. You need money to restore seagrasses. They also came out with why seagrasses are important to people. I grew up in Austria, a landlocked country. My family doesn't know about seagrasses. They used to not care about seagrasses. But when you look at graphics like that, um, the blue carbon and the carbon sequestration that is possible because of seagrasses, um, that affects everybody, not just coastal communities. So things like that, excuse me, graphics like that put things in perspective. So overall, we can say that seagrass research is at an all-time high. And seagrass habitats are now embedded in many a country's coastal management plan. We're supporting even more nations now who are just coming around to managing their coasts with an eye towards seagrasses like Madagascar and Mozambique, places like that. And obviously, those habitats benefit from all this public attention, which means that we have to collaborate even more. It doesn't do any good if I sit here on the Cape and I do my work and I'm good at my work, but people somewhere else, even as close as Acadia, they might not have the know-how, they might not have the means. We need to collaborate, we need to teach each other how to monitor and how to restore seagrasses. So not only is it like the actual talking to each other, we also have to share data. We have to share our numbers with other scientists, with local and regional governments. So everybody's on the same page and everybody can make informed decisions. And obviously, we have to educate people about seagrasses, like I'm doing right now. So this is where SeagrassNet comes in. SeagrassNet was founded in 2001. We're having our 25-year anniversary this year. And it was founded by Fred Short at the University of New Hampshire. And initially, excuse me, the goal was to establish a baseline. What is the status of seagrasses in the early 2000s? And are there any threats? And if yes, what are they? And how are they impacting the seagrasses? What's the impact of human activities? What's the impact of global climate change on those seagrasses? So we've come a long way in the last 25 years, but some things are still true. Our collaborators, we share, we help each other. So people are part of a larger community. They get help, they get guidance, and we all put our observations in context with each other, with similar regions, with similar beds and meadows. So I took over SeagrassNet 2 years ago now, and we're we're not moving on from the initial effort, but now we know we have a baseline. We know the status of most of the eelgrass meadows. We know the threats to most of the eelgrass meadows. We know the trends that influence the health of those eelgrass meadows. So we can shift our focus a little bit. And we're hoping to This is our mission. We're hoping to empower scientists, managers, and volunteers, which is an important bit for me, in monitoring and understanding seagrass ecosystems through coordination, training, and data solutions. So really, and our values. There was a lot of talk, should we keep the diverse global community in there when we started this last year, because we were still hoping for federal funding. But anyway, so SeagrassNet has around 112 sites in 30 countries. Last year, we were lucky to establish three new sites in the U.S. Virgin Islands, one location in Ireland, one in Alaska, yes, and one on Nantucket. And then this year, we're hoping for collaborators in Spain and New Zealand. Fingers crossed. So we truly are a global effort. And it's important to say that I have not visited all those locations. I hope to, but it's not up to me to establish a new monitoring site and figure out where it should go, because there are people who live in those places and they know their seagrass meadows, they know their coastlines. I don't want to be the one to tell them what to do and where to monitor the seagrasses. I can help them, I can provide them with some equipment and all the knowledge that they need to do that. But I step back and let other people make those decisions that affect them directly. So the way SeagrassNet works is that there are 3 transects parallel to the shore at 3 different depths. And if you're on Pleasant Bay around early July, or if you're in P-Town in early August, you can watch us monitor seagrasses. So we go out there, we go to those 3 transects at 3 different depths. Usually we monitor at low tide. And along those 3 transects, we have 12 stations. So we go to the exact same spot every year. We use GPS and we use markers to find those spots. And along those 12 spots, we collect a bunch of information. So when we establish a new site, we do collect actual seagrass specimen for an herbarium and for genetic analysis, for chemical analysis. We try to only do that once because we don't want to destroy the place that we hope to protect. And I just saw a chat here. Am I running late? No. Sorry about that. We check for the species composition, which is pretty straightforward here on the Cape because there's mostly only eelgrass. Occasionally we get widgeon grass, but you can imagine if you're in Belize like this picture or somewhere in Southeast Asia, this gets much more complicated when you deal with up to 10 different species in one little quadrat. Here we go. We look at the seagrass percent cover, how much of the quadrat that we use is covered in seagrasses. We look at the canopy height. We measure the actual length of the blades. And we count the grass. Somebody sticks their head in the water and counts every single shoot of the grass to learn more about the density. Every 5 years, it used to be every year, but we're moving away from that. We collect biomass samples. So we actually collect plants and roots, above and below ground biomass, for a variety of reasons, like how are they dealing with the carbon? How are they dealing with the nitrogen input into the water? Things like that. They can also be used for genetic analysis. We check for the presence of flowers and fruits. That upper left picture is from Provincetown. Those little things to the right of my thumb, those are actually the seagrass flowers that we get here. We take pictures, lots of pictures of every quadrat. We check for the evidence of grazing, which is pretty straightforward in a place like Belize or certain places in Africa where you get turtles or dugongs or manatees who actually eat the grass. Here on the Cape, we occasionally get crabs that like pinch it, but they don't necessarily eat it. We get those little isopods. They almost look like roly-polies. When they get desperately hungry, they will take out a bite of the grass, but it's really negligible. We take grain size samples to check the ocean sediment around the eelgrass bed. We check the salinity, which is pretty much the same year round here on the Cape, but other places like the Mediterranean or the Baltic Sea, where you have a lot of riverine input, you do see differences. We check light, how much light does actually get to the seagrass. And we check temperature using little temperature loggers like that stay out the whole year. So using all of these, all of this data, We can compare different locations around the world. All this data can now be uploaded through our new website. We want to make it really, really easy for people to be part of this effort. So sharing this data is a very important part of that. And that was one of my goals when I took over, to have one spot online where everybody, no paywall, no nothing, where everybody can look at the data and download the data, which we did. We're still working on, excuse me, we're still working on making all the data available. There's like 500,000 lines of data right now that has to be QC'd. We have to make sure that nothing is like doubled or tripled, things like that. But as we do that, we make it available to everybody. This is our website where you can find all of this information. And this is how you download the data. You can basically download everything we have from all the locations from Palau to Brazil, for all the years that we have data. I inherited around 70 copy paper sized boxes of samples from all over the world. The ones that you see here are actually from Fiji. They're almost 30 years old. I did not realize that tinfoil can deteriorate. I thought tinfoil was forever, but it is not. So we're doing a lot of cataloging and a lot of trying to save the samples. I learned a lot about museum preservation and different kinds of papers, things like that. So we're trying to save that collection. And we just cataloged our last samples, our last seagrass samples. Excuse me. We cataloged more than 20,000 specimens from 42 locations around the world, which basically makes our collection the largest collection of seagrass specimens in the whole world. And it's hosted at the Center for Coastal Studies. And then we're trying to spread the word. After COVID, a lot of people have stopped monitoring for various reasons. So we're trying to get in touch with them. We're trying to re-engage those teams to go back to monitoring, which is more challenging than I thought it would, because a lot of the email addresses that I inherited don't exist anymore. So if you happen to know anybody in Fiji, please let me know. I'm trying to get a hold of them. And then we also want to include technologies like remote sensing, satellite imagery, things like that. There are a lot of very remote seagrass beds that might be in great shape, but we don't know about it. So we're looking into this as well. And then, yeah, turn the seagrasses from the forgotten ecosystems that the UN termed them to a publicly recognized ally in the fight against climate change. And we hope to showcase all the people who are helping us on our website. We want them to be recognized, not just on a website, but also through publications, scientific peer-reviewed publications. We want to get education and outreach materials in multiple languages so everybody can understand. We hope to do more outreach. We hope to host workshops, all the things you can think of to get people engaged. And then I have some updates. Very recently in February, we released a new protocol called SeagrassNet Rapid, which is especially geared towards small teams with small budgets. All those things I listed earlier that we look for, that can get very expensive. You need a bunch of people to help you with that. So we wanted to do away with a lot of those things and really focus on the seagrass essential ocean variables. Don't deal with any fancy equipment. So everybody can participate, but still get, good scientific data. And we hope to get the new protocol featured on the IOC, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, for best practices. We're working on that right now. And then we released a photographic guide to identification ID guide for seagrasses around the world. So there's actual pictures, which is very helpful, not drawings. They're in color, not black and white. We included a global range of for every species and also included the IUCN rankings, which is like the red list. And we hope to also put that on the Ocean Best Practices platform in the future. And then, like I said, we have a couple of more locations. The US Virgin Islands, Nantucket, and the Philippines said they would start monitoring again. They stopped after COVID, but they're willing to start up again. And then Antigua and Barbuda is very interested in managing their seagrasses in the whole country. Same with Belize. I recently was in contact with people from the Indian River Lagoon in Florida. They're very interested in seagrasses. And we have engaged with many people around the world who recognize the importance of seagrasses, but don't necessarily have the means to monitor them, which is where the SeagrassNet Rapid protocol comes in. And then usually at the end of my talks, I give people some homework, and it involves watching TV. So there's some documentaries, some recent ones, some a bit older, that I encourage you to watch. Blue Carbon is about a musician who realizes that she has a pretty big carbon footprint with all the touring she does for her concerts. So she starts looking into mangroves, marshes, and seagrasses and how to help and restore them. A very, very cool documentary. Then obviously there's Oceans, the most recent David Attenborough documentary that came out last year. There's a good chunk of it is devoted to seagrasses, so go ahead and watch that. And then the Green Planet, we all know about the Blue Planet, but the Green Planet, it mostly deals with terrestrial plants. So you can skip right ahead to like 15 minutes in where seagrasses are featured. And that's it for me. Any questions?
Thank you, Agnes. That was very interesting. Um, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or comment them in the chat. But I was wondering, what is your favorite seagrass meadow that you've ever visited?
Um, I would have to say the one in Alaska. It was just when I'm on the Cape and I go into a seagrass bed, I try not to step on the seagrass. I'm very aware that like this is fragile and I shouldn't even touch it. But when that seagrass bed in Alaska in Eisenbeck, it's there's so much of it. And the blades are so long, and there were sea otters and walruses and all the things. It was phenomenal. Yeah, that would be my favorite.
Did you, I know this summer we had a manatee swim up. Did you get to see that this
I
summer?
did not get to see the manatee, no, but it happens every once in a while.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. And it probably doesn't like the seagrass up here. It's used to other seagrass in Florida.
Does anybody have any questions? We got someone in the chat.
Is it possible to plant and replenish seagrass around the world, or will these efforts be futile, given they are continuously disappearing due to environmental stressors such as pollution and climate change? You can plant and replenish seagrasses around the world. We're actually actively doing so in Pleasant Bay. The plants went in last fall, so we will see this spring if they took root and if they're growing. It's too soon to tell. things are still pretty cold and dark. Um, there's a lot of efforts happening. I'm working on a project to see what can be done about Billingsgate, for example. There's different ways to restore seagrass meadows. Um, you can, both have been, all of them have been semi-successful. You can take plants from a well-established bed and take them to another spot, um, which has been incredibly successful on Nantucket, for example. You can harvest the seeds from plants and store them in little upwellers, and then when they're ready, you can take them out and plant them. The people in the UK have been very successful with that. You can do a mix of both. Um, you can hope for good luck and put the seeds and the plants in little, almost little tea bags that will deteriorate over time, and just throw them overboard. So there's a lot of ways to do that. It takes time and it takes money, which is why we're starting to really do a lot of research before we start a restoration. We need to pick the perfect spot where we have the highest chances of success. And that involves looking at boat use, looking at light availability, looking at the sediment. It involves looking at what is around the potential site. Is there grass around it, which would make it better? There's a lot of research happening to we call it site suitability model, because we want the site that we choose to be suitable for seagrass and have a better chance of success. So yes, it's possible. And as people learn more and become more aware about seagrasses, hopefully pollution will go down in the future, and that should help as well.
I actually have a question regarding marine construction. So, if there are instances where the eelgrass or something similar attaches to the turbidity barrier or any of the equipment, is there certain guidelines that construction needs to follow, or how do they go? How do they proceed if the eelgrass attaches itself?
So the eelgrass, so two things. Technically, seagrasses in Massachusetts fall under the Wetlands Protection Act. So if you want to put in a new dock, or if you want to put in new moorings, you should check if there's seagrass there. And if there is, you need to do a whole assessment to see, could you move the mooring a little bit to the left or something like that. There's seagrass safe moorings, which don't have that chain on the bottom that drags around as the boat moves. Um, there's rules that people should follow in terms of how high your dock is, how wide your dock is, especially if it's over seagrass. So there's that. And then, excuse me, seagrass has roots. So the only way it can attach to something is if there's sand on the bottom that it can grow in. Um, I hope that it grows in everything, and I hope that it attaches to everything, but unfortunately it doesn't. So if there's any construction happening and they're in an area where there is seagrass, that's an issue that hopefully won't happen. It shouldn't happen. And there's ways around it. So, yeah.
And I think if there are no more questions, I'll ask my final question, which is you recommended watching the films, but what
Yes.
else can the average person do to help support the conservation of seagrass?
Um, hmm. I mean, a lot of Cape Cod is, in terms of seagrasses, incredibly well studied. We know with the Park Service and with all the science institutions in Woods Hole, with the Center for Coastal Studies, we know a lot about the status of our seagrasses. We still go out every year and check if everything is in order. Um, but now that we know what's going on, we're working towards restoration. And restoration, it takes a village. It takes more than a village, really. Um, so if you what you can do right now, if you have a boat, don't anchor in the seagrass bed. Um, Pull up your prop when you see that you're going over seagrass. You don't want to rip it up. It's bad for the grass and bad for the boat. Um, do Try to not put too much fertilizer into the water. I realize that people like green lawns and it can be pretty to look at, but all that stuff goes into our oceans, which causes the algae blooms, and then the light doesn't reach the grass. So those are very small things that you can do that are, for me, easy to say and easy to do. You can also get involved in. I usually look for volunteers to help me with monitoring in the summer months. So you can reach out to the Center for Coastal Studies. We have a volunteer coordinator. Um, they are, we have to work around the low tide. So usually they are very early mornings, crack of dawn type of thing. And then we're out in the water and we monitor the seagrass until the water gets too high. Um, because we actually have to reach the grass to count the grass. So that's our limiting factor. Um, you can support SeagrassNet. You can donate to SeagrassNet if you're so inclined. You can help us by getting. We have an Amazon wish list that is linked on our social media. You can follow us there because a lot of the teams that we hope to engage, they can't necessarily afford an underwater camera, or those 50-meter measuring tapes are surprisingly expensive, so they can't necessarily afford that. So you can help us by buying equipment for us that we then send off to, I don't know, Panama or Mozambique or anywhere who needs them really. Um, you can email me with questions if you really want to get involved. And yeah, there's many ways, big and small.
Well, thank you very much, Agnes. We appreciate you waking up
Yeah.
early and
I
take.
hope the chickens weren't too loud. Yeah.
So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again to the Chatham Cultural Council. And we've got one more webinar coming up next weekend. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.